Well, hello, Jackie. Welcome back to the Writing with Purpose podcast for a second time. This is part two. So, thank you very much for sharing some of your time with me again.
It's good to be back here. I really enjoyed our conversation last time. And yeah, looking forward to what unfolds in this conversation on the podcast.
Yeah, and I think we both felt that there was so much wisdom that was being shared in that podcast that we couldn't really just end it there, even though we had to because of time. So we decided we'd do a part two. So great. So there's a couple of quick questions, I think, just to fire at you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
What was the last book that you read?
Well, that feels like a tricky answer because if I go onto my Kindle, there's so many different books that I'm reading. And I thought because I'm often working on different projects around the same time. So I'll do like, an hour on one, and then I might be planning a workshop and I go on to something else. So then I like to look at different books that kind of stimulate my thinking. I love to pull out the research. So that was a little bit tricky when you said to me, what's the last book that I'm reading? But I did I've been carrying around this book for the last 2 weeks.
Uh-huh.
It's called A Foot and Light-Hearted. It's a journal for mindful walking. The author's name is Bonnie Smith Whitehouse. My daughter gave this to me um, in 2019 for a Christmas present. And I was just like, when you're like, I was like, I don't know this book. How did you find this book? And I read it in 2019. I read it again in maybe 2, 3 years later. And then I remembered it the other day and I thought, oh, I've got to go back to this book.
Yeah.
And it's just an absolute pleasure of a book. It's got really, I know I've got my blur on, but I love the spaciousness in the book. So she has like a little essay. She'll share some of the research. So this one is around some research that was done at Stanford University with Marilee Oppizizo, I think, and Daniel L. Swartz, who confirmed that walking increases creative ideation in real time while the
Oh,
walker walks and shortly after when the walker stops. And I often talk about that on my workshops, how writing stimulates your creativity. But I like the way she puts in the research, then there's space to write in the
yeah.
journal, which I haven't written in because I don't like messing up
No,
books. But I
I'm
write
the
in,
same.
yeah, but I write in my own journal. And it's just beautifully laid out. There's illustrations in it, and it's all about the benefits, the many, many benefits of walking, from the physical benefits, the psychological, the emotional, what it does for your creativity. And it's just it's a gem, and I just really, really like it. And I can stop on a small section of it and just meditate on it. And then I'll sort of get lots of ideas myself. And then I might go
Yeah.
write something, but it's been stimulated from her relationship with walking and nature.
Mm.
That's what I've,
Yeah, that sounds great. I've written that down, so I'll include that in the show notes, but I think I'll also
yeah,
get a copy myself. My birthday's
yeah,
coming up, so that can go on the birthday list.
lovely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds as though it's one of those books that you could flick through a few pages and probably just select a section and then just really get into that section. It's not something that you have to read from cover to cover to get the benefits.
And I've been really working with books that haven't got too much dense words because I realize I spend a lot of time on screen and spend a lot of time looking at words, including in my own journal. And one of the things that I do with my own journal is I use a lot of color.
Yeah.
So colored pens, and I will use, at school, we were taught to underline our headings. Were you?
Can't remember. I've got a memory of starting to write using a ruler to
Right.
guide me.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
can't remember, to be honest. I know we had it was a long time before we were allowed to use a biro and a fountain pen. It was pencil for a long
I was
time.
taught to write with pen of an italic fountain pen at 7 years old at primary school
Wow. Yeah,
by
that
an
was a bit
amazing
later.
teacher that we had. And actually that fueled my love of writing.
Yeah.
because we would spend the afternoon writing in italic. I always got comments on the my handwriting. People loved my handwriting. It's got messier over the years as I've gotten older, and you just like I write so much. But actually, when I take my time and I go back, if I've got the right nib, I can write really well using italics. I love italics, and I love the way it looks on the page.
Mm.
So just thinking about at school, we used to underline um all of every essay that we started, a piece of work that we started, we had to underline the title. And I've noticed I started doing that in my journal
Ah.
as a way of saying this is a new topic or a new theme, or I might mark it that I want to bring this out and put it in a workshop. But it just doesn't feel so dense when I
Mm.
open a page and there's a bit of color on there, a bit of underlining on there. So yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think you're sort of invited to the page a little bit more if
Yeah.
it's not dense.
Yes.
I do have my normal journal here actually, but I'm still quite linear. But I do tend to sort of bubble around what date it is. And when I go back and I do some reflection, I tend to use a different colour pen. So I've got a Bic pen here that's one of these four colours, but it's the pastel version that I love, and I always guarantee the pink is normally the colour that disappears first. But yeah, and I also I'm not great at it, but I want to start doing more of including things that have happened throughout the day or throughout the week, and cutting
Yeah.
things up and sticking them in my journal. So that's probably a nice sort of side way in to asking you, Jackee, what your thoughts are on nature journaling, and if you have any kind of nature journaling practice, because a lot of that's more about drawing, what you've seen and really making more about the senses, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know I've read some information on John Moore Laws.
John
Um,
Merle's
yes, that's it. Mm,
yeah, his son's been talking a lot about those three sort of principles. I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of.
mm,
For those of you who might be listening to the podcast, John Muir was an American walker and nature person who's often quoted. He was the one that was that quote. I'm now going to mess up the quote, but it's something like, "I wander outside in order to go inside." And
yes.
actually, he used to wander up. He's a hiker. He used to a mountaineerer. So, he was really writing about his relationship and time out in the wilds and in nature. And his son has actually really taken up the sort of environmentalist kind of work of that his father did. And I heard him share these principles maybe late last year on a podcast on the London Writers' Salon. So when you
Oh,
shared it
yeah.
with me, I was like, oh yeah, that it really struck with me because what I realized for me, nature writing is so many different things, Anna.
Mm,
It's not just one thing. So first of all, when people talk about nature journaling, let's give it a general term. Some people think, oh, I've got to be a good drawer or I've got to be a good sketcher, because obviously there's lots of artists and people interested in botany who draw and sketch flowers and plants and trees in immaculate form. But that's to me is not what nature journaling is necessarily about, even though I know a lot of people get so much from that, and that's great. But for me, nurture journaling is really about how you express your own personal relationship with nature. How you do that can happen in a number of different ways. So when I first really deepened my connection with nature as an adult, I did it through walking. Well, first of all, I did it through running, then I did it through walking. And what I would do, I would run or I would walk for around my local park, and I would end up at the top of this little hill underneath what became my mentor tree. My
mm.
mentor tree is that wise tree that I used to go to. I can't remember if we talked about this in the first podcast.
We touched on it, but we you didn't delve in too much about
Oh,
what it meant and how you took that journey forward.
yeah. Well, it came out, it happened at around a time I was experiencing a lot of overwhelm and burnout, and I was exhausted. And but I wasn't quite naming it in my sort of journal writing. It was a bit like a bit of a I was doing a lot of venting, but I wasn't expressing where was this, where was all this, what was the source, where was all this coming from?
Yeah.
But when I got out in nature, and when I befriended this tree, because that is really what I did, I befriended this tree, and I would end up making an appointment to go and do my run, and then I would end up at that tree, and it became a daily appointment. And what I found when I was under that tree's canopy was that I felt myself sort of coming home to myself more. I felt like I could be more present to myself. It's really funny. A client recently said to me, I said to her, "What does walking mean to you?" Because she was telling me about how she'd been finding she'd been spending more time going out walking and how beneficial it was. So I said to her, "What is it that's beneficial to you about walking?" She said, "Well, I feel like I notice that my productivity increases." So if
Mm.
we go back to that earlier research that I mentioned, what happens to your creativity outside of your work, away from your desk, and what happens when you get back to your desk. So that was like her personal relationship with nature and what it meant for her. But also she then said, and actually I get really present. And I was like, yes, that's often what happens when we're nature journaling is we get very present. We get very present in the moment in a way that we sometimes don't do in our daily lives.
Mm.
I've noticed, I've been tracking that when I start scrolling on Instagram, because that is my default, that's where I fall down the hole. No, it's when I go on Instagram. It's often because one, I'm not present, and two, I'm trying to avoid something.
Yeah.
But it's hard for me to take out my phone and look on Instagram when I'm under this beautiful specimen of a tree. Yeah, it's like all of my focus and my energy goes into the present moment. So I can be more present. And that's what I found when I was under my mentor tree, that every morning, because I would visit early in the morning, it would just be me and the dog walkers in the park. So it would be very quiet. I could see the main road down the bottom of the hill, but it was almost as if I was in my own private cathedral. I was in my own private church. And I found that I could commune with myself in a way that allowed me to unravel what was really going on
Mm.
and to see that I needed to make some changes, some quite drastic changes in my life. And I think what happened was I recommitted to my relationship with nature.
Yeah.
And of course, I started to see it differently. I
Yeah.
started to notice every tree, including trees on the drive of the house that I lived in. I lived in this massive Victorian house. I had this apartment that was on the top two floors. I was surrounded with just amazing trees, plane trees, oak trees, beech trees. It was, they were out the back garden. They were at the side of the wall for the house, dividing us and the house next door. There were trees along the side of the one side of the drive. To be honest, I've been coming in and going out. They all looked great, but I hadn't really been
You
even
hadn't
thinking
really
about what
noticed that.
tree, what tree.
Yeah.
I just knew they looked nice, they felt nice, and including one of the trees had grown so tall. I was on the top floor. I'd lived in that house for 17 years, or that home for 17 years. That tree had grown as high as my kitchen window.
Oh, wow. Could you reach out and touch it?
I could literally put my hands through all of the branches.
Wow.
But what was really interesting, the birds didn't come that high, so well, there were lots of other trees in the garden, so they definitely didn't populate this tree as much. But I started to draw that tree and
Yeah.
it put me back in touch with drawing. And again, it was another way of getting very present to yourself and to the moment. And I remember I got some really nice quality artist paper, and I started sketching and drawing the tree as I was recovering from some time off of work because I was just so exhausted. That's how I would spend my mornings, getting a cup of tea, sitting at the dining room table, which was right in front of this massive window. And I would look out into the tree and just draw it, and it would calm me down.
Yeah, sounds fabulous.
Yeah, so that for me is nature journaling is really about our relationship with nature, whether that's through drawing, painting, writing, creating poems.
Mm,
Know, doing voice notes as you're walking through nature, speaking aloud into your voice notes on your phone, just the things that you're noticing, the things that you're seeing, the things that you're experiencing. This is where that quote, that those three principles I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, can be so helpful.
yeah, it's
So
almost
just
like it's giving you a little bit of structure to really appreciate what's around you. And I think the first part, the notice is about your awareness and become present. And then the wonder
yeah,
is almost the sort of curiosity level
yeah.
of, thinking about something more than perhaps what's just there. I don't mean to go inside your head and, where we spend too much time, but, just thinking about other things. The trees in particular, how did they get here? What have they seen over their years? How everything's all connected. And that reminds me of, I think, is great because that sort of can anchor you in some way.
I think that's lovely what you've just said because so much of my experience in nature has been from my lived experience. And then I make sense of it as I start to read and I hear other people's experiences. But when I first encountered that deep connection with Sanctuary, that's the name I eventually gave to that tree.
Ah,
Yeah, her
lovely.
name's Sanctuary. Sorry, I just should have said that.
Yeah, no, it's okay, but I did have a question in my head that I was going to ask you if you'd given it a name. So I'm glad you brought
Yeah,
it back up because it had gone
yeah,
again.
absolutely. And it's because I was tapping into the kind of energy of that tree, the personality of that tree, and the fact that that tree had been there so Sanctuary could be heading towards her hundreds now. Um,
Mm,
I can see she's getting a bit frail in places. And I was tapping into the wisdom of that tree. What had that tree seen before? What does that tree know? There's this beautiful quote by Robert Macfarlane when he's writing in one of his books about writing about places that we are energized by. And I
mm,
often think about sanctuary. And he asks the question, what does this tree or what does this place know of me that I cannot know anywhere else?
yeah.
And what do I know of myself when I am in this place I know nowhere else? And the moment I came across those questions, it's honestly, I've carried those questions for about 10 years and I use them in my workshops a lot because I feel they do personify what can happen when we really allow ourselves to just be very open. And I love the word that you use, curious out in nature. And that's what I found with the trees that I needed to find answers in different places.
Mm,
It wasn't necessarily in a therapist room or in a coaching session. I needed to go out and seek questions in a more generative way. And what I found is the space that was created around being in Sanctuary's presence meant that I could listen more to my
mm,
own internal voice. I could tune in more to my intuition or my inner tuition, that inner guidance system. And I just found that so helpful.
yeah.
It sparked so many different places that I went to in terms of my work and what I generated, programs that I created, retreats that I started to lead. It was a very pivotal, transformative period of my life that has
Yeah.
actually gotten me to where I am today.
Yeah, I think transformative is a great word to use when you step out into nature and you really find that connection wherever that is. That could be a meadow for some people, it could be a
Yeah,
forest, a particular tree.
yeah,
And I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and we were talking about that inner knowing or whisper from within. And it's almost as though outdoors and trees in particular, because I feel the same as you about that allows it to just rise out of us a little bit more. And you talked about the contrast possibly, or the similarities with the therapist room. And almost in a therapist's room, I know you have the questions and you're sort of guided that way. But I think a lot of people, they come to that period of life perhaps, and they think they'll see a therapist or a counsellor. And it's almost as though I need somebody else to tell me what to do. Whereas when you're out in nature and it is just you, you're
yeah,
finding what you need to do from within you, and creating that space, that environment, the things around you that will help you to do that,
yeah,
and the energies that you need to be able to bring that to the surface.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, finding those answers within, I think more and more because society, the world we live in, is so information generated, we're in danger of nullifying to our
Mm,
own inner thought
yeah.
processes, our own thinking. Um, with AI at the top, tap of a fingertip, just being willing to flood us with this is how you do it, this is what I know. What's going to happen to the originality of our own human mind and our own thinking? And
Mm,
I'm really right now for where we are at this intersection. I feel like more and more people are going to realize that they need to go back into the natural habitat.
yeah.
We're going to need it. There's
Mm,
no doubt about it. The more we become AI, artificial intelligence generated society, the more we're going to have to go back to the old ways
mm,
as a allowing us to connect to our whole selves in a more embodied way.
yeah. Yeah, it is. It's an embodied way. It's embracing what we've always had. And it's
Yes.
almost a way of relearning what the ancient ways were. Because we have, with technology and human advancement, we have lost a lot of those original ways. Yeah,
I was just thinking of
yeah,
a quote, Robin Wall Kimera. I'm pronouncing her name terribly wrong. She said, the land always has the answer.
yeah.
Love that.
Yeah, because even if you just think, see, this is where the I notice, I wonder, and it reminds me of, you were talking about that, and that reminds me of how Earth and the natural environment is so good at regenerating itself, no matter what happens to it, floods, fires, it always has the answer to rebirth, regrow.
We could have a whole conversation about that. And one of the best books, I'm really terrible for names today. One of the best books I read was Isabella Tree's book about
As
Nebworth,
well.
about the land that her family name of her family land that she regenerated. Beautifully written book. Couldn't put it down. But it's really speaking to what happens when we give the land the chance to regenerate.
Mm.
And I see it with my plants. I've got plants in oh, first of all, I used to be a plant killer. So, do you know, I need to clear that. My home is full of plants, and I'm very proud to say flourishing plants. It's
Yeah.
amazing to see what's happened since COVID. That's when I became much more kind of with my green fingers
Mm,
inside my home. I just accumulated lots of plants during lockdown. And I've seen it. I've seen plants. I've looked at them and like, oh my God, you're dying. And I've known how to tend to that plant. I
mm,
looked at my peace lily the other day upstairs in my shower room. I was like, what's going on with you? It just looked wrong. And I
right.
had not been around a lot. I've been staying down at the Kent coast a lot. And when I came back, I was like, oh my God, the peace lily's dying.
Mm,
I hadn't had the time. I picked up the peace lily out of his pot. The pot was half filled with water. It had
right.
been
Mm,
sitting in water for about 2 weeks without me realizing. And I mean, the thing, it looked, you know, if, like sometimes we don't know that we're sick.
yeah.
Look at that peace lily and tell that something was seriously wrong. But because I hadn't given it the time
Mm,
to notice it, I almost didn't catch it.
mm,
And I love that metaphor that nature gives us, plants give us, trees give us. You know, the redwoods, they regenerate from forest fires.
yeah.
They're resistant against forest fires. I mean, they are a symbolism of growth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's so many lessons that we can learn
We
from nature
really can.
ourselves. I can think about so many times when I feel my life has just not gone in a direction that I would have liked it to have gone, or something's happened that's been quite devastating. And you think you can't think your way out of that darkness. You think, oh my God, how am I gonna come back from this? But then you look at yourself 4 years later, 3 years later, and you think, oh, you did come to the other end of that. You
Yeah.
did get through that. You did grow through that. There's that saying, go through, you have to grow through what you go through, or the other way
Oh, I like
around. But
that.
you know that
Yeah.
idea, we grow through what we go through.
Yeah, and I think that's another beauty of journaling is if we actually make a note of these things, we can look back and think how much we have grown from a certain point to another point. But because it might be slow at the time, we really don't notice it. Can I just very quickly show you this plant that's by my side here? Because
Absolutely.
I used to be a plant killer, exactly the same.
Oh, we've got to
But
find a name for ourselves, haven't we?
look at this.
Oh, and now
Look at
she's a
all these
beauty.
extra shoots.
She's a beauty. She's happy.
Yeah, and
She's
I it
look at the energy and the
mm,
vibrancy in her.
yeah,
Beauty.
and
Ah, that's lovely.
she didn't used to be like that though. And then I bought a new pot for her, some new indoor compost, and yeah, it's just flourished. And this actually, I've already taken probably 6 cuttings, and
She's
she's
abundant.
still
She's so giving.
yeah,
But
yeah.
notice
But
what
it
you
makes
said there, Anna. You bought her a new pot. She's got more room to grow.
mm,
Plant roots need space. We could ask ourselves the equivalent of that. That's what I love about the metaphors associated with nature.
yeah,
You could take that metaphor of, oh, do you need a different space to be in so that you can grow? What about the soil? What do you need in that space? Who are the people you need in that space? What are the activities you need in that space?
yeah,
And that's what I love to do. I really like to bring into my coaching work those metaphors because they're very generative, they're very soul satisfying, even to the hardened director of a housing association. They can soften to a nature metaphor
mm,
to think more creatively about their own well-being, their team's well-being, you know, the well-being of the clients that they serve through providing homes for them. I have very rarely seen someone be resistant to a nature inspired
mm,
journal prompt of
yeah,
some kind.
yeah. Yeah, there's always the understanding, the connection. Looking at time, it might be a great place now to ask you, Jackee, because we've talked so much about nature and trees. If I could invite you to share one tip for people perhaps getting started with journaling, or even for the seasoned journaler. Is there something that you would recommend for them to go a little bit deeper? What's one tip or one technique that you would share?
So for somebody starting a journal, I talked to on a recent podcast about what I call micro journaling. Yeah, so the idea is you don't have to have a lot of time. It's really helpful to have some structure because I think one of the biggest blockers to journaling is the blank page.
Yeah.
Like knowing where to start. So the very first thing I would say to people is date it. Date your page. That helps you arrive. Yeah. We talked, I think, about on the first podcast about the weather forecast, that
Yes.
actual journal practice that I talk about. So I won't go into that on this part. You can definitely go back to the first episode and listen to the weather forecast. But I put down the date and the time and the place.
Mm.
Yeah, as a way of kind of locating yourself. And then what I would do is I would invite someone new to journaling to get into a really conversational conversation with themselves. So I want them to keep that kind of like, it's almost like you're asking yourself a question in a way that a friend might ask you a question. And you respond in that kind of energetic energy around it as well. So you might say, write to this prompt, like, how are you doing today, right now?
Yeah.
How are you feeling in your mind, your body, or your spirit? What are three good things that have happened so far, no matter how tiny that they might be? Um, what have you done so far in your day that requires a bit more of your attention?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. What's frustrated you today that perhaps you've ignored or you've let it get on top of you? And what's one thing that's within your control that you could do about that frustration right now? And then a question that I always invite people to also kind of lean into. And by the way, Anna, you could just use one of these prompts and that will get you going.
Mm. Yeah,
You know,
doesn't
so
have to be all of them. Mm.
it doesn't have to be all of them. Um, And the other prompt that I invite people to lean into is what are you not writing about? What are you not talking about in your journal?
Yeah, trying to encourage people to be a little bit more honest and actually reveal something that they are trying to avoid.
Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. And then for seasoned journal writers, and I've been keeping a journal. I definitely was keeping a journal when I had my first had my daughter, and she's in her late 30s. That's when it really kind of it became a practice.
Mm.
Um, so I would definitely consider myself a seasoned journal writer. And the way in which, so the answer to the question around for people who are seasoned journalists, I would say play with different mediums.
Ah.
Play with different. I liked what you said at the beginning. I have journals going back to the late 1980s, early 1990s, where if you flick through the pages, you will see collages, mini collages, images. And in fact, I remembered there's a journal. And by the way, I remember all of my journals by how they look. I
Ah,
can remember a year and I think, oh, I know what journal I was writing in.
yeah,
I have a
wow.
photographic memory for remembering journals hold what. It's probably one of my superpowers that I don't really talk a lot about.
It is a
I
superpower.
Yeah. I've got this little green journal. It would be over there in the chest that's in the office, the room that I'm in. And in it, there's a photograph of an oak tree with seats all around it. And it's in Oprah's garden of her house.
Right.
She's got these seven oak trees that she goes and sits with. And I remember back in 1995 when I stuck that in my journal, I thought, I want a house with a tree
Yeah.
in the back garden like that. It's taken God, nearly 40 years,
But
maybe.
you have it now.
I have a massive weeping willow at the
Oh,
end of my garden.
gorgeous.
And it probably is the reason that I live in this house
Yeah.
because the house was speaking to me as I was walking through it. But when I got into the garden and I saw that tree, it was all over.
Yeah, it was the tree that drew you in.
It was all over. I was like, how could the universe send someone who loves trees as much as I do this beautiful, majestic weeping willow tree that absolutely weeps, by the way. I spend
Mm.
every week having to sweep up. I mean, it definitely weeps. But right now, whereas I'm quite secluded from some of my neighbors, we can all see into each other's houses now because it's bare.
Mm.
But the catlins they're all budding now. So I know that spring is on its way and that tree is going to be full soon.
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can just picture you sitting under it.
Oh, there's lots of sitting under it. There's lots of
Mm.
I'm doing lots of talking to it now. Because actually so I'm very busy. So sometimes I have to schedule time to go in my garden because I
Mm.
get like, I can be on Zoom all day. And by the time I finish, I've got to go and make my dinner and then I haven't gone out into the garden. So I literally have to, it's a work in progress.
Mm.
Even as much as I love and I write and I walk and I talk about being in nature, I have to work at it, but I'm glad that I've got that tree there as a symbolism and as something to draw me out. And there's hundreds of plants in the garden because I
Yeah.
came with a truckload of plants and there were already plants here. But what I love about so many of them, like for example, my olive trees, I've all got olives on. Oh, and I had them at my other home for about 5 years and they didn't bear an olive. There was no olive in sight. And
Oh,
I've
so
come
they
to
are much happier now where
they're,
they are.
yeah, they're much happier.
Yeah. Oh,
So did I make
fabulous.
that clear? Different
Yeah.
medium, voice
Mm.
note, drawing, sketching. Try something different. Sit with more silence and space,
Mm.
as a way of bringing in variety to your journaling. And then I would offer people to go to Kathleen Adams and Deborah Ross's Reflection Right.
Yeah.
The observations after you've drawn or you've written or you've done a voice note. What are you noticing? What are you aware of? What surprised you? What do you want to focus on more? And just kind of notice how the walking and the writing really are companions. Because if you think about John Muir's I Notice, I Wonder, I'm Reminded of, it's very, very similar.
Mm.
Take time to notice what has
Yeah.
come up
Yeah,
or
yeah, and
what,
they're very simple steps as well, Jackie, aren't they?
yeah.
It's just giving yourself the time to, I think coming back to what you said, you said nurture journaling to nurture ourselves, and being out in nature is a lovely way of just getting back to our roots and nurturing us in deeper ways. So yeah,
Definitely.
thank you very much for sharing those techniques. I think whether you're seasoned or not, even the starter prompt questions are fabulous for people to not fear that blank page and just get a practice going. So yeah, thank you, and thank you for part two. As always, been an absolute pleasure once again. I really do appreciate your time and coming on for a second time.
Oh, it's been great speaking to you,
Thank you.
Anna.
Thank you for listening to today's Writing with Purpose podcast. Having conversations with fellow writers or adventure enthusiasts brings two of my biggest loves in life together, writing and nature connection. I've been a copywriter and content creator for 23 years, but my passion is writing for well-being, and I'm on a mission to share the benefits that putting pen to paper has for personal wellness with as many people as possible. If you want to learn more about writing for your well-being and journaling techniques, please connect with me in my Facebook group, Journaling with Anna.